let's start with the story that we have been covering in depth. The Prime Minister has travelled to the West Midlands, where 19 houses have been fully destroyed in a fire there. Fire services are continuing to tackle multiple blazes. Andy Burnham's been speaking in the area, issuing warnings to the public.
Please, everybody, take the greatest of care. In fact, don't light anything in an outdoor space right now. Britain is a tinderbox right now, and please just have that in your mind. We're going to go into the rest of a weekend that is a difficult weekend. This is not over by any means. We've got 37 fires smouldering around the country, so it could be more. So please bear that in mind at all times. And, you know, we've seen the reaction of the public here in Stourbridge. It's unbelievable, by the way, you know, the rescue centre, the things that they've brought in. The public are brilliant. You know, people are great. You know, they come out and they support each other. It's just that one person who doesn't think, you know, lets everybody down. Please don't do it.
Well, the Prime Minister speaking there in Stourbridge, and at the same time, disposable barbecues have been temporarily banned from sale over fears that they pose a significant risk to the public. With these heatwave conditions continuing, they've been the cause of a number of serious wildfires across the country over the summer months. We heard from the Prime Minister that this idea was discussed at an emergency COBRA meeting earlier this week. Let's talk now to Richard Parker, who is Mayor of the West Midlands. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure you're incredibly busy with what's going on, but could you give us a sense of how the area is coping? We had some very vivid descriptions there of the terrible conditions that people have been having to sustain.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on. I was really pleased the Prime Minister wanted to visit today. He spoke to me last night saying that he'd like to visit, and we just wanted to make sure that it was the right thing to do given the level of fires and the amount of work going on, particularly being led by our emergency services and the fire services Stourbridge. But I'm very grateful for the Prime Minister visiting. We met some families that have had to stay in the evacuation centre overnight, and indeed we met a family that sadly and quite awfully lost their home, and we actually on our tour of Stourbridge actually saw their home still smouldering very sadly, and then we met members of the community, and we met and thanked members of the fire services and all the emergency services that have been working so heroically to contain the situation. I'm very pleased to be able to report that the situation is much improved on the ground, and the main fires are under control and have been dealt with. But there are still, I think we mentioned in the previous report, there are still very localised smouldering around Stourbridge, and the fire service are working really, really hard, very tactically in a very focused way to ensure that that smouldering and those smaller concerns don't get out of control and reignite, if you like, and cause the problem to continue and become worse. So I think we've turned a corner, thankfully. And again, I'd like to thank the emergency services and particularly the fire service for the great work they've done. But there's no room for complacency, and I think that was very clear in the words of the Prime Minister this afternoon.
Richard, I think all of us have been struck by the thought that up until now we've heard of wildfires, haven't they? And they've been far away from people's homes. They've been on land or forests or big open areas. And here for the first time, people's homes have been destroyed. Whole houses have been randomly taken out by the fire. What's happened to the people there? How are they being cared for, and what help will they get?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think you're absolutely right. I talked to the Prime Minister this afternoon that the events we saw in Stourbridge, and indeed what we've watched on news channels, resembles what many of us have seen in Southern Europe, or indeed on the west coast of the US over recent years. They're now affecting our communities in a very violent way here in the UK, and I think particularly here in the West Midlands, communities on the edges of our urban areas that run against and are adjacent to open fields and are really, really very at risk. And that grassland, once it ignites, is very powerful, and it has reached into our urban conurbations in a way that hasn't done before. And that is something we need to deal with going forward. But I'm really pleased. I mean, the collective effort of the local authority, the emergency services, the brilliant work of the community across Stourbridge and voluntary organisations has ensured that everyone is being well looked after. They have their facilities at an evacuation centre in Stourbridge, at Stourbridge Town Hall, and a school was used to, because the school was used overnight for those that needed to stay and needed access to overnight accommodation, including residents of a care home. Obviously, there are some people that have lost their homes and they're being supported in an appropriate way. And what is important is that I work with other services, and particularly the local authority in Dudley, to ensure they will continue to support the people that most severely affected over the coming months and weeks. Indeed, we met one family that lost their home, and their biggest concern, because of some travel arrangements they've got, is how they get their passports renewed very, very quickly. And the Prime Minister personally said he'd support them to help them through this particular period of time they need that particular help. But there is fantastic community support, but there are, of course, members of the community, particularly those 19 people and families that have lost their homes, that are going to need more support than others. And I've said to members of the community and others that, as Mayor of the West Midlands, I am here to work with them, support them in the best way we can. And currently we are working through their particular needs and also the support they need, so that they can get back on their feet as best they can as quickly as possible.
And what's your view on the temporary ban on the sale of disposable barbecues? Some people might say, well, can't I use one in my own garden? Do I have to restrict it completely? Do you know what the rules will be and what the sanctions will be for people if they do use them?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is very, very clear. This country, our grasslands, our gardens are a tinderbox at the moment, and we must remove as best we can any risk that any outside fire or situation of extreme heat gets out of control.
So even in a private garden, you're saying it shouldn't be used?
That would be my view. I mean, those wildfires, hopped gardens and moved between gardens in homes rapidly yesterday, tens and tens of miles an hour, and we've seen the effect and the impact of grassland fires, how quickly these fires rage, and we must, in my view, avoid all and every risk of events like that occurring. They can run through and destroy communities and homes very, very quickly. And I think it has to be more than simply barbecues. It's important that all members of the public, I think, take personal responsibility for the way they conduct themselves, and they need to act responsibly in any situation. Only this morning, travelling to Stourbridge, someone in front of me on a road just threw a used cigarette out the window. It landed on a pavement, but in another environment, adjacent to a dual carriageway or a grassy bank of verge, that sort of incident could give rise to what we saw in Stourbridge yesterday. It can happen as quickly as that, for reasons in some ways as simple as that.
Yeah, and you've got to try and get the message through somehow. Look, Richard, just to say, 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of arson after a fire damaged 4 homes in Stoke-on-Trent. Staffordshire Police said they received a call from the local fire service shortly before 4:15 on Thursday. I'm just reading this here. 23-year-old man, 24-year-old woman, both from Stoke-on-Trent, have been arrested on suspicion of arson after the incident. Your message to everyone is clearly, just take care, be sensible. Don't play about with flames of any sort.
No, absolutely. And I would say more than take care, take extra care. These are, we are in a very difficult moment in our country. We've not had rain for months. The temperatures have been very, very high. Our land is very dry. There's no moisture in it. And as the Prime Minister said, large parts of our grasslands and our agricultural areas are a tinderbox at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I just plead with people to be extra careful, extra cautious, and double up on being responsible. And I think that behaviour needs to continue, in some ways, indefinitely, but certainly we can't relax our focus on public safety at this moment in time.
Thanks very much, Richard Parker, Mayor of the West Midlands.